Above the tree line, I have with me Nick Keegan, who is the co-founder and CEO of Metrics based in Dublin, Ireland. Nick, welcome.
Thank you, Andy. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Nick, I'd like to say a relative newcomer to the space, meaning that you didn't grow up in this industry, right? You came at this from a very different perspective, and I thought we could start there. You won Entrepreneur of the Year from Ernst & Young in Ireland, which was really impressive. What was your thinking when you got started in the print service provider customer communication space that this was a market that you wanted to go after?
So we started out, Metrics is a technology business. This is my first real job. I started this business when I was...
No, you had a job, but
yeah. I did 11 years in the Army Reserve, but that's what I wanted to do as a career. But myself and a couple of friends, we had an idea for a mobile app. And the idea was that it was one of these digital mailbox type solutions that were all the rage at one stage. The idea was that we would build an app, consolidate all of your household bills and statements into one easy to use app. And ultimately, that's the business that we started. Like with most startups, the idea you start out with isn't the idea that you end up with. And so that idea ultimately failed, but we landed on more of a white label customer communication management solution for regulated industries. We were a software business, purely software business for the first 7 years of our life. And we had print partners that would print and mail any printed correspondence that we needed in order to service our customers. And it got to the point where we were putting so much print volume through our print partner that we decided we should acquire that print partner for 2 reasons. We probably didn't set the agreement up very well, so we were giving away a lot of value, but equally, we're very focused on digital communications, and we felt that we could sell our digital solution to the print customers of this print partner that we were going to acquire.
Yeah. Of course, that was Adair SEC. I think that's pretty public at this point. But was that the first acquisition? Was Adair, or were there other ones in there before that?
There were others. So the first one actually was in July 2021. It was a business called Persona, who were a transactional print service provider in Dublin. We then acquired Forth Communications a month later. So that was a UK business. In 2022, we spent the year trying to figure out what the hell we just done. In 2023, we acquired another business called Daffel. And then last year, 2024, we acquired Adair, which was our largest acquisition to date.
Pretty well known in the UK market. Were you surprised when you got into the guts of what it takes to operate a print service company, what you found? Was it a little surprising to you how that business functions, or was it what you expected? You know, when you come from a digital first sort of point of view, and then now you're getting into the ucky manufacturing sort of industrial process of putting ink on paper and putting it in the post.
Yeah, it's interesting. From very early on, we had partnered with print service providers to provide the print element. And so we were somewhat close to it, and we had a good understanding of how those businesses worked. Managing large capex and all of the other challenges that comes with running a manufacturing type business as opposed to purely a software business. It was a bit of a mindset shift, but actually I always think of print service providers as actually being, they are technology businesses. Like a huge amount of the end-to-end process is actually technology focused. So it's not, let's say, equivalent to a commercial printer where there's a lot less technology. They have to have a lot of software developers, data analysts, composition, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So really there's a lot more similarities. A lot of people within the businesses speak the same language. I think the biggest change was maybe the mindset we had as a young growing technology business was very much move fast, fail fast, figuring it out as we go. And a lot of the businesses that we acquire are much more mature. They've much more mature processes, and in some cases they're set in their ways. And so culturally it can be a bit of a clash, but it's been really interesting.
Yeah.
Shift for us as a business.
Yeah, and that shift from being a consumer-focused mobile app, right, and wound up being now you're on the other side, on the output side, working with the enterprises that are producing those outbound communications and helping them make sure those are done in a secure, compliant way, which is really unique to the transactional critical communication space. The amount of integrity and security around those communications is it's not optional, right?
Absolutely. And we take that very seriously as business critical documents and communications. And without the service that we providing the solution that we provide, a lot of these businesses simply can't operate. They can't build, they can't generate revenue, they can't service their customers.
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of security and compliance, as you and your listeners well know.
Yeah. I talk a lot about the transformation of print and mail communications to digital, whatever that might look like. And the UK is, I would say, ahead of the US market, but maybe not as advanced as some of the other European countries or even the Asia Pacific countries. What's your view on where we're headed? And we talked at this before we got on the podcast about how the changing nature of this industry and how we have customers today, or you have customers today, that are printing and mailing, putting things in the post, but how that represents an opportunity for transformation. And I guess so that's part one. And then part two is how the markets look different to you, UK versus elsewhere.
Yeah, it's interesting from a print service provider perspective. I've visited lots of PSPs across Europe and the US,
right?
And they all do the exact same thing. Right? It's very similar. All use the same vendor, same suppliers. With the exception of how the postal system works, it's exactly the same thing.
Right.
However, when you think about digitization and the levels of digitization country by country, it can be wildly different. So there's certain European countries where we're too late to the game. All the digitization has effectively been done. Sometimes it's driven by government, and they are almost totally digital.
I think Denmark is the big example that everybody looks to.
Right? Yeah, for example, exactly. And even if we look at Ireland and the UK being Ireland's nearest neighbour, the UK is certainly ahead of Ireland in terms of that digital shift. So some of the tactics and strategies and go-to-market approach that we had in Ireland won't work in the same way in the UK because it's a different landscape. So digitization is quite advanced in the UK, but there's still a long road to go for sure. But certainly when we often joke that we wish we started this business 15 years ago because we could have rode some of that early digitization wave. It feels to me, from what I've seen, that it's that point in time in the US. There's still a huge volume of paper. And of course, digitization is happening everywhere, and we can look at individual case studies of where companies have really driven digital for their communications.
Right.
But by and large, across the industry, it seems to me that European countries generally are much further advanced on that than the US. You can look at that in two ways. You can say that's a big threat that's coming down the line, or you can look at it and say, actually, that's an opportunity. We very much see it as an opportunity as opposed to a threat.
Yeah. What are the big drivers, though, in your mind? Obviously, postage is the one that I think most people would probably point and go, the cost of simply putting something in the post is getting to be prohibitive. But what else? What are the other sort of drivers that are pushing the industry forward?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. I think, as you mentioned, postage costs are a massive driver. In Ireland, it's now €1.40 on average to send a letter through the mail.
United States.
So and it goes up every year without fail, like 10, 15%. There just becomes a point in time where the CFO in an insurance company or a bank or whatever the case may be just says, I'm not doing this anymore. And they take a much stronger, firmer stance on digital. Then you have just changing consumer preferences. We have Apple Pay. It's so simple to tap. I'd argue that nearly every product you buy, you probably either start or complete the purchase online. You get a quote for insurance online. You can apply for mortgage online. And when you start a digital journey and it ends up in a paper channel, it's very fragmented. It's not a very good customer experience. And I think consumer expectations are driving a lot of that. So you get this nice confluence of enterprise want to save money, consumers want a choice of how they engage with their service providers, and by and large, the majority of people are digitally native and they're happy to procure an insurance policy through their mobile phone or through the web. And so the alignment is between the enterprise who wants to save money and the consumer who wants ease of access and self-serve options.
Right.
And then you've got the print service providers in the middle who arguably in many cases wanted to go the other way. They want to keep the presses busy. And I suppose that's the challenge, right?
No, for sure. That is the innovator's dilemma, I think, is the way that it's often phrased, is at least in the United States, that I would guess that on average, probably more than 80% of the typical PSP, probably closer to 90% of the revenue is related to print and mail. And that is a big challenge. It's also a big opportunity for companies to come in and disrupt that. And we see certainly plenty of evidence to suggest that this transformation has occurred around other places in the world at different cadences and for different reasons. I would say the other one that is regulations in certain countries, certain types of communications have just been mandated. They've just been outlawed, right? Thou shall not put that kind of stuff in the mail. We haven't seen that in the United States yet, but I think in my view, it's just a matter of political willpower for those types of changes to occur. If it's not explicitly stated that a communication can be delivered electronically, it's assumed that it's going to be printed and put in the mail. So there's this ambiguity across a lot of regulations in the United States that just we don't know. And so we're looking for lawmakers to clarify some of that.
That's interesting. Look, we've seen that the legislation is vague enough that it's open to interpretation in a lot of ways. And you can look at that in two ways. If you're a print service provider, you could say, look, it's vague enough that actually this should be printed and mailed, and that works in our benefit. But for us, we're pretty focused on that digital conversion, and that's a key metric for us.
Right.
It can stop some of our customers from digitizing because the compliance department says there's a risk here, we're going to stay on paper.
Right.
We've tried to take a much more firm stance that we are the thought leaders. We understand all the regulation. We're creating white papers to say, this is exactly what the law says. Here's 3 senior counsels who've all given their opinion. So we can put a bit more weight behind that argument.
Right.
But what we found happens is as the postage prices continue to rise, that pushback around regulation gets scrutinized through a different lens, and people are more open, and companies are more open to taking a bit of a risk or seeing what their peers are doing, not just relying on the status quo.
I think one of the areas that, again, we talked about at the top of the call was this idea of where obviously this industry is changing, right? And I think the US, depending on who you talk to, is as much as a decade behind other parts of the world. Maybe not a decade with the UK, maybe let's say it 5 or 6 years behind the UK, but we're definitely the last bastion of big print and mail. The US market represents 50% of the global mail volume, even though we're only 3 or 4% of the population. So do the math and you go, wow, that's crazy. There is opportunity here. I'm curious about, you are now working with a private equity firm. You've done a lot of acquisitions. How is that going to play into the future of this market? Because it seems like, to me, this is technology, right? This isn't just go in the back room and spend an extra shift, run and stand in front of a press. Companies are having to make big investments in this technology, not just the technology, but the ability to sell it, to support it, and provide all the regulations and security and things that we've talked about. How do you see private equity playing out in this industry? Because it seems to me that it is a big underlying engine that's moving things forward. And what, in your view, what are they looking for? What do they see out there that's got them excited?
Yeah, it's not easy from my perspective. It's not easy for a print service provider to build their own technology platform and make that mindset shift that instead of being a manufacturing type business, we're going to become a technology business.
Right.
We're going to sink a whole load of cash into this project with uncertain outcome and build a bank level security customer communication application. Like, it's not easy to do.
And bring it to market within a time where it even is going to matter.
And look, the first time we did it, we made loads of mistakes, and we have multiple iterations of our platform to get us to where we are today. So it's certainly not straightforward.
Yeah.
And so I think you will see, and we have seen examples of more technology businesses entering this space for various different reasons, right? Because the businesses, like these print service providers, have really good customer contracts. They provide a critical service. And how can you make change from the inside by acquiring those businesses effectively? And I think with the private equity question, the real value, if you look at the profile of these businesses, imagine you described them on a piece of paper, but you didn't say what the industry was. You have blue chip customers, generally no bad debts, recurring revenue or reoccurring type revenue contracts, generally good margins, so on and so forth. A very sticky customer relationships. You would say that's the hallmarks of a fantastic business and a fantastic investment opportunity. But then when you say, but they're in the print industry, people get nervous because how much longevity is left in the print industry. That's generally where investors get nervous. But insofar as those businesses can be acquired and additional products, services, digital communications, if you can change the over-reliance on print, but keep all of the other characteristics that these businesses have, there's potentially really good arbitrage in terms of what you can acquire for over what you can transform the businesses into, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's why you're seeing a lot of private equity interest. And also, it's still quite a fragmented marketplace. And whenever you have a fragmented market, the old roll-up of trying to acquire multiple providers and roll them up into something larger and all the benefits that gives from an enterprise value perspective, there's a lot of private equity interest for that reason.
Yeah, there's many have tried that, and many have failed in terms of doing roll-ups. Obviously, that the industry is consolidating, and so I think we're going to continue to see more of that. But thank you for that. That's a really interesting perspective. What about AI? I'm always hesitant to bring it up because I think everybody's so exhausted talking about AI. But you got to have an answer, right? You got to have a talk track around AI. So what's Mail Metrics' response to the AI question?
Yeah. We're very focused on AI at the moment, but I think in a pragmatic kind of way, like everybody asks the AI question and you have to ask it,
but
you have to have an answer for it. But for a long time, if I'm honest with you, I didn't really have an answer because I just wasn't sure where it applied in our business. But I think the mistake I made initially was probably thinking way too broad in terms of how can we use AI to absolutely transform absolutely everything we do, one big bang approach. And I think actually as we broke it down, it's probably more sort of in strategic areas of the business, I think AI can have a big impact, but AI won't be our core proposition.
Right.
So for example, when we acquire a business, generally they are doing kind of large broadcast print communications. So big batch print files will be sent and will be distributed out. And as we onboard them to our platform, we're migrating more towards communication orchestration across multiple touch points and channels and trying to bring a customer through a multi-stage journey like buying motor insurance or getting a mortgage. When you think about the amount of data that a business like ours processes and all the various touch points that we're logging, we're thinking about using AI to really optimize the most appropriate or the best sequence or cadence of communications to optimize that end-to-end journey. And that might be different for you or me, depending on our profile as a consumer, right, age, demographics, profession, whatever the case may be. So we're trying to move away from broadcast communications to more measuring the outcome. So if you're applying for a mortgage, the main thing is how quickly can you get someone through that pipeline and how many mortgages can you sell? And how can we use AI to really optimize that process? Obviously then with Mail Metrics, we manage both inbound and outbound communications, print and digital. And there's a very clear use case with inbound communications. Lots of unstructured emails and documents coming into an organization, processing them at scale, utilizing AI. We're also looking at how we apply that to the generation of communications and the development and the building of templates with some experiments that have been really interesting. For us, it's not AI is going to totally change our proposition. We have multiple different modules of our software, and we think that AI can generally be plugged into each element and provide a benefit.
Yeah, very tactical.
My honest answer.
I think that's a smart answer, because one of the things I found, I was at an event just last week in Las Vegas, and it was really clear that where the big, in this case, it was an insurance show, where the insurance underwriters, where they were with AI relative to all the vendors on the floor, there was a huge gap. All the vendors saying, hey, we're doing AI and we got AI. And then the companies, wait a second.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting to see this, the hype and the excitement and the energy around AI, but the reality of when you actually get on the ground, the big businesses are taking a very pragmatic sort of approach to, yeah, okay. And I think they're going to look to their service providers and say, okay, yeah, that's really cool. That ain't going to touch our data.
Exactly. And particularly in regulated industries, in technology, we've always taken an approach of find a hypothesis, a potential use case, create a minimum viable product, test it. And if it fails, just move on to the next thing, and a really iterative approach. And if it works, more investment, more time is spent on it, and you'll pick the winners.
Right.
That's how we're approaching it. And everything you do, every person you talk to, every potential new employee that has AI skills that comes into the business, you learn something. And it reminds me of the internet. When the internet came out first and you sit down in front of a web browser and you're like, I don't really know what to do with this. You had this incredibly powerful tool, but you didn't have the frame of reference to know how it could change the world.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. And in fact, I'm going to be talking about that in my keynote at your customer event. Before we get there, one of the things that really struck me about your comments, though, is you are a technology first company, a digital first company that's approaching the whole print and mail question very differently than other companies. And it would seem to me that everything you were describing from a services perspective is not a traditional PSP is going to like, we're going to send this, we're going to print this many pages, we're going to do this many mail pieces. And so therefore your bill at the end of the month is X, right? It's very straightforward math that they do that says X number of mail pieces, print pieces equals X amount of. You're talking about a whole completely different business model in terms of how you're going to generate revenue. And so that needs to look different. And because of that, I assume you're also selling to a different kind of buyer at the enterprise. It used to be the purchasing department, go buy print for us, please.
Yes.
Now it's a different kind of conversation. How are those conversations? I guess I'm just curious what your view is on those conversations and how they look different than the old model of just volumes and outputs and channels, right?
Yeah. So there's two things there. I agree with you. How many impressions, how many pages, how many envelopes are we going to send in a month, or what can this bring into our factory? And we see a lot of print service providers who take the same approach when pricing digital.
Right. And that's their first mistake.
Yeah. So a lot of people will, at least from our experience, they'll very proudly say, we make a 98% gross margin on a digital communication, but they're selling it for a penny or a cent. And so you can make as high a gross margin as you want on that. But if you're making 30 or 40% on a printed communication and you're charging $1 or 50 cents, you're losing money as you convert. And that's the trick, is to not think about this like don't price this the way you price print, because it's not print.
Right.
And people think that because it's digital and you don't have a printing press and you don't have an envelope inserter and a 100,000 square foot factory, that you can't charge appropriately for it. I think that's why it's important that we stop focusing on the channel delivery and focus more on this end-to-end kind of communication solution that you can provide to your customers, for which print will play a part.
Yeah, print is always going to be a piece of that. And I don't want you to give away your secret sauce here that Metrics has, but print is always going to be part of the equation. And I think one of the conversations that I had recently with another leader from a print service provider, and I think she said it really correctly, was in order for us to maintain our print revenue, we have to do more digital. In other words, if we expect to be the print manufacturer of record in the future, we better come with a whole lot of digital capabilities for that customer. So it's a complete flip.
Well, absolutely. To back that up a little bit, like in 2020, we had no print volume whatsoever. We were purely a digital business. We're now the largest transactional print provider in Ireland, and we're the second largest in the UK. And I think we could say we're the second largest. It can be tight sometimes, but a give or take, we're pretty big, right? What we've seen in every market that we've been in, as we really start to drive digital and the conversion to digital, our print volumes go up, which is the most counterintuitive thing ever.
Right.
But we've had to buy more equipment and more equipment, because from a new business perspective, that's what customers want. They don't want somebody who's going to fight tooth and nail to keep as much print on the presses. They want somebody that can help them with a managed service to move as much print towards digital as their customers want, and really have a partner. And so we win more business.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to have 2 or 3 different vendors, one for print, one for digital, and so on.
Yeah. And that's an area that really fascinates me, because there are examples of this around the world where companies have taken the same approach and their print volume has actually gone up, which, if you were to go to an average operator in the United States and have this conversation, they'd be like, nope, I'm not doing it because I can't make enough money sending emails. And say, you can't. You're 100% right. But I describe it more as the bell curve. The bell curve today, at least in the United States, has very long tails. Those tails are shrinking in.
Yeah.
And that bell curve is getting narrower and taller. And the companies that sit under that curve are going to benefit from print.
Yes.
And it's why we have these conversations with PSPs that say, we can look at the data. The mail volume's going down. And what is mail? It's print. Without print, there is no mail. So there's a direct correlation. But they're like, hey, but our print volumes keep going up. I'm like, then you must be doing something right on the front end because you're grabbing that volume.
And I can just say more thing on that around the thought process. I can't make enough money sending emails, like absolutely. But all of the compliance and the controls that print service providers have around printed communications needs to be wrapped around, you know, digital communications also.
Right.
So we're not selling email, we're not selling SMS, we're selling a platform.
Right.
And send multiple channels of communication. So everything from reconciliation, audit logs, open rates, and all of the stuff that's necessary for regulated communications that you won't get from a MailChimp or any other email marketing platform. That's what the customer pays for, not actually sending the email.
Yeah.
I think that's the shift in mindset. If you start to price yourself as cents or fractions of a cent for an email, you've lost.
You're in that channels and outputs mentality is never going to work. It'll never.
Exactly.
So you've got a big customer event coming up in London on November 12th at King's Cross. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I suppose what we're trying to do is bring thought leaders such as yourself, existing customers, potential customers, just people from the industry in general who may have an interest in customer communications in regulated sectors and where we are today, what the challenges are, what the future holds. Get everybody together into a room and really just share where our thinking is going, allow our customers to stand up and speak about maybe some case studies of how they've managed that shift towards digital, how they've navigated the regulatory environment, to our point from earlier on. And it's really just about peer learning and positioning ourselves as well as thought leaders in the space, laying out our stall as to who we are, what we do. It's not a sales pitch. Like, we'll probably talk about mail metrics very little on the day, but it's a great way for us to build those relationships and just get some really interesting people in the room and have an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think it's really important because we are, I think, one of the big areas from a CCM perspective. You mentioned platforms, and that's where we're headed, right? It's going to be built for purpose platforms that may have a vertical expertise behind them, but that's where we're heading. The bits and parts of buying from the CCM vendors, yeah, that's still going to exist. But from a service provider perspective, we're moving into this era of platforms. And there are a number of vendors here in the US that are thinking the same way, but I think that's really what I find fascinating about yourself and the Metrics story is you see yourself as a technology company, as a digital first company, and you see the print as an opportunity to build a relationship with the customer and pull that volume into a new experience and a new business model. Nick, this has been great. Is there anything else on top of mind that you wanted to touch base on or clarify? Hey, Nick, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you on November 12th at Connect 25 in London. Great.